Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcomed Dr. William Soliman to the show. Will is the founder and CEO of the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. And as you listen to Will, his passion is palpable. It's contagious. And he's a person of action. He comes from a long line of entrepreneurs who have seen needs in the world and in their communities and have taken action. And that's exactly what he did when he founded the ACMA. The ACMA is one of a kind. It is the only recognized program by regulators for the accreditation of medical science liaisons and medical affairs professionals. Who Will is to me is integrity. It's what he wants to create at a new level in the life sciences, ultimately to ensure maximum effect and benefit for the patients. And I'll just let you know, I had a little bit of an issue on the audio on my side in this conversation. While everything should be understandable, you'll hear it's a little bit off. Thankfully, Will's audio is great, and that's what's most important. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Dr. William Soliman. Will Soliman, welcome to the show. Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Really excited to have you today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Very excited to be here. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. So you just heard me do a brief introduction of you and who you are to me. I would love for you to start us off and just let us know what you're up to in the world.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm entrenched in the pharmaceutical life sciences space, a lot going on in the space. And now what I'm working on that's really been very interesting is looking at how we can integrate AI into the work that we do. So what we've been working on now, we'll be launching probably the next month or so, is a new product which basically provides for pharmaceutical companies an AI solution that, think of it like having, Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo on your team. That's how I think of it, right? It's like having this super genius team member that has a massive amount of information that they're trained on for machine learning and our algorithms on everything related to medical affairs, which is a specific function within the pharmaceutical industry. My area of focus is specifically on the medical affairs side of the business. That's the part of the business in the pharma industry that's related to generating data, new data on drugs once they've already been commercialized and hit the market, and on educating doctors and other healthcare providers on those drugs. And so medical affairs focuses on that. So this AI product is a new solution that we're offering to medical affairs team members that I think they're going to absolutely love.
That's really exciting. I think there's lots of noise around AI that sort of it's big and scary, but I love your embrace of it in your context as a real asset to the people that you really want to serve. It sounds really exciting.
Thank you. You've always got to evolve. I mean, in running a business and being an entrepreneur, you can't ever stay static, right? So when we first started the company, now almost 9 years ago, we started really with one certification program, actually, which is our flagship product, Board Certified Medical Affairs Specialist Program, or BCMAS. And that's all we had for probably about a good year. And then over the years, we've added many, many things, got into different areas like market access, field reimbursement, biologics, biosimilars, and now the AI solution space. And I just think this is really, really important because ultimately, I'm a believer that in the next decade, the reliance in the many industries on AI is going to significantly increase, exponentially. So I think we need to get ahead of that curve. I still think there's always going to be a need, obviously, for what people do. So I don't want people to misunderstand that. But I do think that the reliance on AI is going to increase. We're seeing that already. Even in my own organization, I see team members that are relying more and more on AI solutions for simple things, whether it's ChatGPT or Bard from Google or whatnot.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just on a personal note, I have a 15-year-old She's got to be a sophomore, and I encourage her to use AI, to use ChatGPT. And she cringes. She's like, Dad, it feels like cheating. I said, no, the stuff is in your head. All you're doing is asking ChatGPT to help organize your thoughts and make things. Our most valuable asset is time.
Yes.
In my opinion, around AI, and the amount of time that I've been able to save, that I know she could save doing research papers and things like that, that the folks that are going to access your AI tool, just it allows you to focus your energy and what you bring best to the equation. I just think it's so important.
Yeah. And it's funny that your daughter said that, right? Like, I feel like I'm cheating. We kind of ascribe this moral aspect to like use the AI. You hear people talk about it like it's like you feel bad about it. And I don't know where that comes from, but it makes me think about, when you were, I don't know, how old you are relative to me, but it makes me think back to like when you first used like the TI-84 or something, in pre-calc or calculus, where people are, they kind of made you feel bad originally. It's like you're almost like you're cheating or circumventing having to do the basic computation in math. But ultimately, it's what you said. It's a way to save time so you can focus on more important things. And I think that whether it's the internet when it first came out years ago, whether it's AI, whether it's the calculator, these inventions really are meant to ultimately make our lives easier, help to streamline processes. Of course, people might use AI for nefarious purposes, but I think we've seen that even with the internet, right? I mean, the internet can be used for things that are very, negative and evil, and for things that are very positive. So I just think the tool in and of itself is not moral or whatnot or amoral. It's it's just a tool, but it's really what the people using it are doing with it.
Yeah. I'm sure there's folks that are listening today that don't know who ACMA is and what you're all about. So could you baseline it for us? What are you up to, and why did you create it? Why did you establish ACMA?
Sure. So if you look at my background, I came from the pharmaceutical industry. I was an executive there. I worked in the industry for about 20 years. And I work specifically in the medical affairs space. By training, I'm a PhD. And that's my background. My background's in biochemistry. So I'm a scientist, clinical scientist by training. And I've always been interested in the interplay between business and science and the impact of education, in particular, scientific education, on industry, on, what are the economic implications of that. And I actually wrote a book on that called The Rise of Chemistry and the Implications for the industry and education around that. And so that's always been in the back of my mind, a kind of a lingering interest. And when I was in the industry, what I saw was a very mixed, kind of wild west setup, if you will, where there really weren't any standards for the people that were going out and educating doctors. I'm not talking about sales reps, because the people listening to me, they might be thinking, oh, you're referring to the sales rep that I see when I go to the office, they bring the lunch in. No, that rep, right, that sales rep, they're there to sell. Make no mistake about it. They're not there to educate necessarily, objective education. It's really selling. I'm talking about people called medical science liaisons, medical affairs professionals. These are people that have advanced degrees. And so they're like me, they have a PhD or an MD, or they're pharmacists. And they're going out there and they're educating doctors and having in-depth conversations, right? So they're not going in and saying, hey, Jeff, today, Dr. Harmon, today we going to talk about this cholesterol-lowering drug. It lowers LDL cholesterol by 35%. Sign here and I'll give you a sample. No. That's what the sales rep does, right? The MSL, or medical science liaison, we call them MSL in the industry, or the medical affairs professional, they're doing something very different, right? They're coming in and saying, I want to talk to you about the recent publication in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that lipoprotein A had an impact on this and this pathway, right? It's getting really deep into the scientific conversation. But they're not trained really on how to be effective in delivering information and interpreting clinical information and on designing clinical trials. And there was really no standard in the industry. And that's really what began to spark kind of the original genesis of the idea that we need to have standards. Then I worked at a company called Viva. Viva is a very well-known company in the industry, who provides, digital solutions for the industry. And, my job was to go out to all the top 50 pharma and kind of see how we can help them. And that's when my eyes were opened. Because when I went out to all these big companies, I went out to all the companies of J&J, Pfizer, Novartis, so forth and so on. And I was like, wow, these guys, things are a mess here when it comes to the fact that they have no standards in place to make sure that these people that are out facilitating research, doing clinical trials, educating doctors, meet any type of standard. And that's really where the concept came from the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, which is what ACMA stands for. The idea was we need to have an accrediting body in the pharmaceutical industry. So think about this. The industry's been around for 250 years. Before us, there was no accrediting body. We're the first to do it in the industry ever. And to me, it's a big milestone.
It strikes me, and again, you could say, well, this has been a path that you've been on for decades. But there's that moment, what you were just describing, around 2015, you were at Viva, your eyes are open, talking to all the big pharma, and you had the sense, but there's lots of people who see stuff. There's lots of people who see things that, let's call them wrongs that to be righted. Not that, again, I don't want to classify anything as malicious or nefarious, but there's a gap, and we see it need to be filled. But then I would say 99% of folks just move on, fingers crossed. I hope that gets taken care of. And you chose to take action, right, to do something really bold, to do something that's never been done before. And I'm just naturally curious about what was it inside of you, maybe conversations at home, or friends. What was it that said, you know what? If not me, who? If not now, when?
So, that's definitely a loaded question in the sense that there's many different factors, right, that influence that impetus to take action. And it relates really to a lot of things. I think one is my upbringing. I have my family's been very entrepreneurial. So, I have an uncle of mine that, has a huge company in the Middle East. My father, who came to this country with nothing, built out, a whole set of businesses for himself. So we kind of come from a family where we take action when we see something, we see an opportunity to help and bring value to the society. So I think for me, it was a no-brainer from that standpoint that, there's something needs to be done, and I think I can do it. I think I can help to bring that to fruition. But then there's the element of what I observed and experienced in the industry, where I was part of, back in the early 2000s, the whole Vioxx debacle. Now, people listening don't know, Vioxx was a drug that was marketed by Merck and Company. At the time, I was working at Merck, and came to find out that, Merck, hid information about the cardiovascular risk of Vioxx, which you could argue is an unethical thing to do. Okay. And for me at the time, a 20-something-year-old, kid really coming out of school, very young, working at a big company like Merck, who prided itself on ethics, that was jarring, right? Because, when you're coming out into the workforce, you have this little bit of naivety, right? You're kind of naive. So for me, that stayed with me. The fact that, companies and the people that were delivering this information maybe weren't always acting ethically and compliantly and with integrity. And, that's why in our board certified medical affairs specialists, the BCMS program, we build in there components, not just for technical competencies, but compliance and ethics and whatnot, because we believe that that's really important. At the end of the day, that's key. If you've watched the, what was the name of that? It's on Hulu with Michael Keaton, that series on the opioid crisis. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Dopesick. Dopesick, that's what it is. So Michael Keaton, right, well-known actor, he stars in a series on Hulu called Dopesick. And you always see, you should watch it if you haven't watched it. There's a scene in the show where they show how Purdue Pharma, which is one of the pharma companies that was in really a big player in making the opioid crisis much worse in the United States, how they were manipulating graphs and data. Again, people were following along with it, right? Nobody said, "Wait, this is incorrect scientifically. You shouldn't be doing this." People were following along. And I think that those types of things, need to be addressed. Um, so to me, it was really an ethical responsibility to say, we need to have a standard in our industry. We need to have a standard. And I'll tell you something. And this is probably a lot of people listening to this are going to be surprised to hear this, maybe not. A lot of leaders, till now, you have a subset of leaders that don't feel they need to take action. They feel like, you know what, everything's been going well, and they got a baby in their own world. It's going well. But we would have to. Why do we have to accredit it? Why do we have to board certify our team members? And I think that's, to me, that's a symptom of a larger problem of really apathy. People get comfortable and they're apathetic, and they don't care. To your point about us taking action, many in the industry do the opposite. They don't take action, and I think it behooves them, and they really should be responsible enough to say, we play a big impact or play a big role in patient lives. We need to take action.
Yeah, I think you only said the word once, but it's just been in everything you've talked about. It's still the word integrity. Like, it is so. It's not even a word, my sense. Tell me if I'm wrong. That even needs to go on a website or say we believe in integrity. It just feels like it's just deep in your bones, Will. Like, it's a non-negotiable. If you want to play, you got to have integrity. Like, could you just for us to, what's that word mean? Because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What does integrity mean to you?
I think to me, integrity is doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching, right? If you're willing to do the right thing when no one's watching, or doing the right thing when it poses a risk to you, right? When you have to do the right thing and there's a risk that you're going to take, that's tougher, right? That's a tougher situation. And look, I mean, we've all made mistakes. Obviously, I've made mistakes over the years of my career where maybe when I was younger in my career, I always didn't make maybe the best decisions from an integrity standpoint, right? When you're young, especially, sometimes you could be short-sighted. And I've made those mistakes 100%. But I think for me, what I've learned over the years as I've gotten older, and also for me, I'm a Christian by background, a renewed faith, and my faith is a Christian. It's really helped to set a strong compass for me that it's important to do the right thing when nobody's watching, but it's also important to do the right thing when it comes to providing value to an industry that's sometimes maybe not always appreciated. And that's a fact, right? Where not everyone is going to see the value of accreditation. And we see that happening even now in medicine. There's a big push by some physicians to say, we don't need board certification. It's not important. But I disagree with that. Would you want a physician operating on you who hasn't had to complete their continuing education requirements in the last 15 years? I can tell you, talking to doctors when I worked in the pharma industry, unfortunately, there are doctors out there that don't keep up with the data, don't keep up with what's happening in the latest and greatest in medicine. And so we always need to have standards. It protects the patients. It protects society. That's to me what this is about, right? It's ultimately about protecting patients and what's in their best interest.
There's this quote by the author John Ruskin. He says, "The highest reward per person's toil is not what they get from it, but who they become by it." And my sense, Will, is there's been just a massive amount of becoming, of who you become as a result of your journey. I'm wondering, if you were to describe that, who have you become? Even the road that you've traveled, how would you describe that?
I think, I'm a father of five, first of all, and, I have 5 kids. And I think when you become a father, your perspective changes. I'm sure you know that. You're a father. You begin to think differently. You think outside of yourself. I remember my father telling me, once I had kids, he said to me, "Look, it's not about you anymore only, right? It's about them. You have to put them first." And that always stuck with me. That ultimately I need to think about what the decisions I make mean to my children and to my wife. Um, I think for me, the key really is that you want to be able to wake up in the morning and know that what you're doing is really bringing value to someone else's life. And I'll tell you a story. I think that kind of helps answer your question. One day, I walk into my office. It's the beginning of the new year. Okay, this is about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And, I hadn't gone to the office. It was Christmas break. So I go in. I have a bunch of mail. I have this FedEx envelope. So, and I look at the sender. I didn't really recognize the name because at this point we have now thousands of learners that are board certified or accredited, and it's one of our learners. I open it up and it turns out to be one of our learners who wrote the ACMA a letter. Okay, she actually wrote a handwritten letter telling her story about how the getting board certified and accredited changed her life. She's someone that grew up in Africa, in South Africa. She had come to the United States alone. She had left her son with her mother, came here alone to try to make more money and be able to give back to her family in South Africa because they were pretty poor. She's a physician by training, but was unable to really get a traditional job as a physician, decided to be someone that works as a medical liaison in a pharmaceutical company. So it was hard for her to do that at the time. She was a physician and working as a waitress. That's what she was doing. It was very difficult for her. And when she got board certified through the ACMA, it opened up doors for her that enabled her to become eventually a medical liaison, make enough money, begin to send money back to her son and her mom. And then a twist to the story, she ends up getting stage 3 breast cancer. Gets stage 3 breast cancer. She's in her 30s. And, she said, look, I'm hospitalized now, but I just wanted you guys to know how much you changed my life and my family's life. Because by providing that outlet, it really helped to open up doors for me as a physician to be able to contribute in the pharma industry. So that's it, right? That to me is it. Like when I hear a story like that, and there's many stories like that we have, where what we've done is help change someone's life or improve a team or whatever it would be. That's what we're doing here, right? We're ultimately changing society for the better, right? And there's a domino effect to that.
Now, what I hear in your becoming, even as you talked a few minutes ago about how you showed up to the world sometimes as a new professional in your 20s, and then to talk about your passion, and it's just palpable to hear about your passion. You have who you become, in my view, as I listen to you, is that there's no debate. You've become the type of person who, with no risk, cost, no cost, this is who you are, and deliver value and to serve the world. It's just really, to witness it as you describe it, is really cool.
Thank you.
So maybe this question is gonna seem redundant given everything we've talked about, but I want to recast the name of the show, Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having, and you pointed to a few things. If you were to name one thing, one conversation that life science leaders aren't having, that you want them to start having or have differently, what would that be?
I love that. I think what leaders aren't thinking about and what they're not talking about and they're not preparing for in the future is, what do we need to do to make sure that we really minimize risk to our organization and improve the effectiveness of our organization when it comes to establishing a holistic standard or level setting our organization. I don't think many of them realize the importance of that. So I think it's kind of short-sighted. I think a lot of times when they provide a training, it's like a one-off training and they're done. But really, I think what they're experiencing from my discussions with them is that one of their big pain points is there's a lot of attrition, there's not a lot of loyalty in these companies, there's a lot of turnover, and that damages relationships with the external stakeholders, the community of physicians and whatnot. So I think they need to have more conversations around that, around how can we preserve the people we have, motivate them, establish and level set our organization so that we are operating at the highest standards of excellence. I think they're kind of entrenched in their day-to-day, and they forget that bigger picture perspective.
Yeah. And I talk to a lot of CEOs in biotech, drug development, clinical research. By and large, they're good-hearted people. They really care. And the environment of biotech, pharma, and pharma services has become so, even it's a reflection of society, which is we're a microwave culture. And that's driven by investor dollars. And it just strikes me as good-hearted and well-intentioned as many of these people, but either our guests or clients, the pressure cooker of the industry is so huge, and it just forces them down this narrow road of quarterly results. Make sure the investors are whether it be private equity or publicly traded, that environment is created less than optimal, and certainly not what you just described as a broader picture of well-being and sustainability. As you're having those conversations, how do you support somebody that's in that pressure cooker to take the bigger view that you are hoping that they start to take?
Well, the thing is, by doing what I'm describing, you're going to actually be more successful when you launch a drug. A study just came out. It was an article written in Endpoint News just this week on how if you have a field medical affairs team, basically a medical science liaison team, an effective one in place, it could improve the effectiveness of your drug launch by 150%. That means you're going to be significantly more successful in launching your drug if you have an effective team in place. How do you have an effective team in place? You do what I'm talking about. So it's related. I think the short-sightedness comes in where you focus on the end goal, but you're not thinking about the people and the structure and the governance you have, and how if you don't really fix that and you're not operating at the highest standards, that can cause a problem down the road. And that's what we saw in the opioid crisis. That's what we saw. And so, unfortunately, as human beings, a lot of times we wait for a problem or a catastrophe to occur, and then we take action, right? That's usually what happens, right? But what I'm saying is, let's get ahead of the curve. We don't want another opioid crisis, right? What we've learned from the opioid crisis is that ultimately the industry played a role, and it was an unethical play in many ways, in perpetuating the use of these drugs inappropriately, right? Many companies, not just Purdue, to pick on Purdue. So if we know that, and we've experienced the fallout from that, why not get ahead and say, you know what, as a CEO of XYZ pharma company or biotech company, I'm going to accredit and certify my team, because that's going to demonstrate my commitment to patients, to physicians, to the healthcare community, to excellence really in my organization. I want to make sure that you're meeting a minimum standard of competency in your knowledge, technically, from a regulatory perspective, compliantly, et cetera. And I think that part is very, very important. Plus, if you think about it, Jeff, think about today. If you and your wife, if you go to a restaurant, a new restaurant, what do you usually do before you go to the restaurant? If you've never been to it before, what do you usually do? You go Google.
Or Yelp, yeah.
You go and you Yelp it, right? You go, you look at Yelp and see what the reviews are, because you trust, right, presumably, the people that left the reviews, what their opinion is of the restaurant. You vet it before you actually go in. And because information today is so readily available, right now, human beings, for the first time really ever, and since the history, but definitely since the modern history, and of course certainly since information history, human beings have had more access to information than ever before. Huge amounts of information. And so really what that means is it's not so much about the information itself. Now it's about that social proof. So just though you Yelp a restaurant, you want to make sure they're legitimate, they're clean, the food is good, etc. It's kind of the same thing if you're a pharma company, right? You want to make sure that pharma company, as the consumer, the patient, the healthcare provider, that they're credible, that you can deal with them and you know that they're going to be ethical, and so accreditation helps towards that end. Just the way if you go to a physician, if you haven't been to a physician before, you do the same thing, look up the reviews online. You get to see, are they board certified? Where do they go to school? What? So you look at these things to give you that peace of mind. So I think we live today in a society where that's a must-have. And I would argue, I'm 46 years old, but I would argue people that are younger than me in their 30s and their 20s, we're even more inclined to want that social proof. And that's part of the reason why you're seeing a big push in industry in general, not just in the pharmaceutical industry, but in general, for a lot of these ESG type of standards, right? Because people want to know that corporations are also socially responsible, that they're thinking about that. And we know investors look at that. That's a fact.
Yeah, and you're opening up a huge conversation of the shift in healthcare in general. And you're pointing to a huge topic that we're seeing in healthcare in general, and you're pointing to it in the pharmaceutical space, is we're shifting from patient being responsive to whatever is sort of given to them, to then for them to becoming a consumer and having power because of the information and access. And that's, again, it's a whole other conversation, but that's really going to shift, in my opinion, the industry that's going to be one of the major trends of healthcare and drug development.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, one of our top selling programs at the ACMA is a program called the PACS program, PACS, Prior Authorization Certified Specialist Program. What is it? It's basically teaches people how to improve prior auth approvals, the rates of approvals. Because when you go to the doctor, a lot of times the patient can't get access to the medication or the service because the insurance denies it. So a lot of pharma companies, a lot of hospitals, a lot of pharmacists, they want to learn how to navigate that whole issue. And I think that in of itself is really important because ultimately the patient doesn't have control. I think today we're living in a world in healthcare where, for the first time ever, there's definitely more empowerment for that patient. They have more of a say than they did years ago. In clinical trials, we see this in the pharmaceutical companies, a lot of clinical trial designs. When I was in pharma, we would bring in patients, get their perspective. I've been to the FDA many times, where we've had briefings and meetings. Patients will come and give their testimony about how the drug impacted their life or what they should look at, the company should look at when they're designing the study as a patient. So 100% the patient is a consumer, and we need to think about what would a patient want. I'll tell you one thing that always stuck with me. There was a mom that I spoke to, a patient advocate, and her son had a rare disease. Okay. And she said to me, wow, I didn't realize that the people going in and talking to my son's physician, they're not accredited or certified by any body. And she was like, that's scary. And then, she had worked with us and supported the work that we were doing as an advocate because she really believed in the mission. And that's just one mom. Again, there's many stories like that of patient advocates. So again, if you're a patient advocate, you want these pharmaceutical companies to be accredited, to be certified. It's a win-win, I would say, for everybody, right? The patient, the company, the patient advocates, the healthcare providers get better information, better informed on what they should be doing from a clinical decision-making perspective. So this is where we need to go. And again, like I said before, ACMA is the first student in the industry, so it's a relatively new concept, but this is where society is moving.
This is so good. I wish we could keep going, but time is short. So I'm going to end on the last question that we ask all of our guests. So you get the magic wand, Will, and you get to wave it over the offices of every life science CEO across the globe. And with that wave, they're going to have one conversation with their shareholders, with their employees, with anybody that you wish over the next week. One conversation that you get to seed. What's that one conversation that you're going to, through this magical process, make sure that they have over the next 7 days?
One thing that comes to mind is, how can we build more trust and credibility in the society, among patients, among our healthcare, among our customers? How can we enhance credibility and trust? I think that's the conversation that I'd love for them to have.
It's a great question. Great question. This has been awesome. Will, share with us in the audience where we can find out more about you, about ACMA, and the other things you're working on.
Sure. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, William Soliman. I'm also on Instagram as well, and TikTok. If you just put in at Will Soliman. Our website is medicalaffairsspecialist.org, or you could also just Google ACMA Medical Affairs. And I'd be more than happy for anybody that has any questions to reach out to me or my team to learn more about what we do.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the show notes as well. Again, thanks, Will. This has been an awesome conversation. A lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Jeff. A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.